Hello everyone, this is Touhou Luna Nights. Now, Touhou, for those of you who are not aware, is a series of mostly 2D bullet hell shmups with the occasional photo-taking game and 2D fighter. It's kind of a confusing series, but it's been going for a long time. And I became a fan of it actually way back in the when the 7th game was sort of making its rounds. I believe that one was called Perfect Cherry Blossom. It's very, very fun, and also kind of a good starting point for the series because it's not quite as difficult as some of the others, while still being very challenging. The Touhou games are pretty cool in their own right because, well, I think the main thing that I really liked about them were just how weird they are. They're very strange, and more importantly, the weirdness of all the characters, each one having very, very odd personalities that, of course, the fandom of the games has just kind of run away with entirely. And I really enjoyed back in the day other like cave shooters, things like that, like say Doranpachi and the like. So when I found another sort of developer of these sorts of games, I instantly kind of latched onto them and tried them out, and they're just really, really fun. And I really like the spell card system in particular, giving a lot of personality to the big bullet patterns on the boss fights and making them all kind of in context with the character that you're fighting. It's a neat little series. And it has a pretty huge fandom, like really huge actually. You can go pretty much anywhere on the internet and you'll probably find some Touhou we'll call it fan art, to be nice, and some other strange things, but one of the probably more interesting aspects of it are the fan games. There are tons and tons of fan games, anything from just kind of simple flash stuff to more complicated stuff like what I'm playing in the background here. Touhou Luna Nights is actually a fan game 2D Metroidvania set in the Touhou universe, we'll call it. And first of all, I should probably just apologize, because most of these words and names I've never heard anyone actually say out loud, so that means my pronunciation of them is probably horrifying, and I'm sorry, but I'm doing what I can. So, in this game you actually play as Sakuya Izayoi, the maid, basically, slash guardian, again, weird series, of the Scarlet Devil Mansion. And her whole thing in the actual mainline shmup games is that she can freeze time, which is why she's such a good maid. Naturally, if you could freeze time, that's what you would use it for, apparently. And she's also known for being kind of a ninja maid and throwing knives around all over the place. And you can kind of see where that combination of things comes in, kind of like Dio Brando style, where, you know, you freeze time, toss out like 6 million knives, resume time, and everyone gets pincushioned instantaneously. That's kind of her thing. And they did indeed sort of do that with this game. This is on a limit, of course, because she's nearly invincible in the series, but obviously that wouldn't be too fun as a game concept if you just could never lose. So her powers are sort of limited because she is in a kind of weird created universe by Romelia Scarlet, and is overall just kind of being toyed around with for fun because that's just how this universe works. This is very much in the style of more classic Metroidvanias, you know, like Symphony of the Night onwards, that kind of classic era, I guess is what you would call it, with things like colored doors that you have to remember where they are and then come back later once you get the key or ability to open them, and things like extra rooms hidden behind bits of wall, and other rooms where you will, you know, see a thing that you really want to get because the thing is very shiny, but you cannot have the thing because you don't possess the upgrade necessary to get the thing, and you must then come back later when you have the upgrade. That's very standard Metroidvania fare, and this game does all of that in spades, so it all feels very familiar. Now, I should probably say that you don't have to be a fan of Touhou to enjoy this game. If you don't know anything about the characters or anything about the world, you could still have plenty of fun as long as you enjoy like 2D side-scrollers or Metroidvanias. It would satisfy that itch, you could say, for people even if they don't actually understand what's going on, because let's be honest, even the fans probably don't anyway most of the time. And it's a really cool game because what they've done is actually sort of import these characters' personalities in a really effective way to this 2D side-scroller setting. So your character, Sakuya, is very stoic, very stern about everything, and all kind of like perpetually confused by all the weird shenanigans that everyone around her is constantly putting her through for no discernible reason. And all the other characters are just a little bit too happy to, you know, be doing horrible things all the time, like shooting giant lasers at you and things. And I will say that they've done a really good job in the sprite work as well. The Touhou games are kind of known for their music as one thing, and then their artwork, as in like the sort of in-game sprites, as another, of being kind of pretty, being sort of mesmerizing because of the large patterns of bullets and things like that, and they have done a really good job with the sprite work in this game. It's pretty phenomenal, actually. Everything from the sort of parallax scrolling backgrounds, giving you a lot of atmosphere to wherever you're at in the mansion, or well, I guess you're not really in the mansion in this case, you're in a sort of created world, like I mentioned. And the sprite work for the characters and the enemies being, it just adds a lot of character, definitely. It has a lot of charm to it, a lot of detail as well, like characters' walk cycles, their idle animations, as you could call them, I guess, their attack animations and everything. It's all very detailed and has a lot of love poured into it, clearly. The people that made this definitely understand what they're doing in terms of 2D sprite work and how to actually convey certain atmospheres and certain ideas through it, and they've done a really good job. And the music is also really good. As I mentioned, the Touhou games are known for their music, and this fan game does not disappoint in that regard either. The music is fantastic. It changes up all the time. Depending on which area of the castle you're in, you'll get a new sort of reprise as you get into the new area, and of course, as you would very much expect, the boss fights are sort of reprises of various character themes to add to the charm, and it definitely does a very good job. The music is excellent. By the way, the Touhou mainline games, the actual like numbered shoot-'em-ups, are actually made by one dude. Zun is what he goes by. I don't know his actual name. He's a very strange man who I'm convinced has never actually been photographed without beer around or in him. At some point, he seems to be drunk all the time, or at least in the process of getting drunk. But he's really, really good at making games, and he does everything himself. The sprite work, the official artwork, the actual gameplay, of course, and the music is all by one dude, and I got a lot of respect for that. That's really cool, and I think that is probably one of the reasons why the fan game scene for these games is so passionate, because, you know, they see the guy that actually makes the official ones pretty much doing the same things that they are, just in the official capacity and getting paid for it. So obviously that puts a lot of passion in the eyes of indie developers and other fans trying to make something of their own, which is a really neat way to do it, honestly. Now, of course, you do have her classic ability to slow time, although, as I mentioned, it is limited. So you can slow time in a very short burst for about a second. You can also stop time, and you have a little gauge up at the top of the screen that shows you how much time, basically, that you have to do that. Everything from moving to attacking while time is stopped will consume this gauge, and eventually when it runs out, you are kicked back to real time. So you can do everything that you would expect, like, you know, freeze time and toss out a whole bunch of daggers for all the enemies on screen, then resume time and they all immediately get hit, to other more complicated things. And in fact, later on in the game, you actually get the ability to use your own thrown daggers as platforms, which is really cool. So you can jump up, throw some, double jump on top of the ones you just threw, and then double jump again to like a really high platform or something like that, and find a secret or just progress, and then resume time, and, you know, everything's up there. It's kind of neat. It's a fun concept, and it kind of varies up the combat a lot, because really everything from the combat to the exploration is quite reliant on this mechanic. That's good, in my opinion, for Metroidvanias, where the abilities that you get are not just used for one of the sort of two big halves of Metroidvania, i.e. combat or exploration. They're actually used for both. Hollow Knight did this sublimely, and this game definitely does it for the most part as well. A lot of the abilities you get can be used both in combat and to explore this crazy place you're in, and you will need good skills with both of those things in order to actually make it out alive, because, well, it's a Touhou game, so it's somewhat difficult. It's not nearly as hard as the actual mainline games, but the boss fights do get pretty tricky. They get really intense, actually. I mean, you would kind of expect so, because they are the signature characters that you know and possibly love and or hate, so, you know, their boss fights are going to have to kind of step up and be pretty tough for the whole fan game scene to really appreciate that, and they definitely do. But of course it does have the Metroidvania elements of exploration, searching for hidden walls everywhere, which is why I'm constantly, like, poking all the walls. The game also has kind of an interesting currency system, where instead of just getting gold from killing things, you actually get jewels. Everything drops jewels, as you can see, of various colors, and they actually represent various rarities. Amethyst being the least rare, which is rude, by the way, because that's my birthstone, and diamond being the most rare, of course. And these are interesting because they actually give you bonuses for having them in your inventory, I guess you could call it, and just on your person, but they are also what you have to sell in order to get gold to buy things at the shop. So These things give very small, quite minute over time boosts to your stats, but you have to sort of sacrifice those boosts in order to get the gold to buy things. The boosts are pretty small, but they will add up if you decide to just not sell anything ever, but the things you can buy are very useful. Everything from healing items that you can use in mid-fight, which is really, really handy, to things like the ability to throw more knives, like up your knife-throwing limit while time is stopped, and also up the maximum time gauge so you can stop time for longer and do more things. Both of those are very useful, but quite expensive. The game also adopts the graze system, interestingly enough, from the mainline actual Touhou shmups. What grazing is in those games is, of course, your actual sprite, the image of your character, is not the size of your hitbox. Your hitbox is a very small dot in the center of it, and so in those games when you're weaving through very complex patterns of bullets, when the shots actually scrape your character but don't contact your hitbox, that's called grazing. And it's what you need to do to earn a very high score and also do some other different types of mechanics depending on the entry. And they actually adopted that for this game. In this case, grazing happens both from being close to enemies, to the point where like your sprite is nearly touching them, but you're not, getting hit by them yet, and also for the projectiles that they fire. And grazing actually restores your time gauge, your MP gauge, which you use for attacks and skills, and your health all at the same time. And your health does not regenerate naturally, so that's very important. Especially in boss fights where, if you don't have any healing items, which I actually have not used yet, I've probably made things harder for myself than I needed to, honestly. But if you don't have anything like that, you're going to need to rely on grazing their attacks to restore your health throughout the fight if you get hit. So I very much like that mechanic. I think it's great that they actually sort of ported it over, so to speak, in a way that makes sense, and in a way that's actually fun to do. You can also graze while time is stopped, like way more easily, as in you barely even have to be on the screen with the projectiles and enemies to graze them, but you get very tiny fractions of the resources back for doing this. The most that it gives you is actually for your time gauge, because it's meant to be used to extend your time stopped while you're actually doing it. Basically, everything else is like a small fraction of what a real-time graze would give you. It's a fun mechanic and it makes a lot of sense here, and I'm glad that they actually included that. You also get skills. As you can see, I have the chainsaw right now, which basically acts like the axe from Castlevania, only it, since it's a chainsaw, it latches onto and does several quick hits to an enemy. You get all sorts of other things, like a stun knife, which is basically like a lightning knife. You get these homing knives and 1,000 daggers and all kinds of pretty cool stuff. And these take your MP. Normal attacking takes MP as well, but if you go near your knives, they will actually float back to you and restore the MP that you lost by throwing them. Using your skills will also use up your MP in a much faster way. Now, the trade-off comes between MP and time, and this is really important during boss fights, as you're about to see here, because when your time is stopped, anything that normally costs MP instead subtracts that amount of time from the time gauge. So 1,000 daggers costs 40 MP in real time, but when time is stopped, it costs 40 time. So this allows you to trade off between the two, because time comes back a lot faster. It regenerates significantly faster than MP does under normal circumstances, and allows you to sort of aim a little bit easier because everything is stopped for a second. So you kind of have to do this dance between weaving through attacks to graze them, stopping at the right times to use the right attacks at the right time, which I just miserably failed at right there because I accidentally tapped right instead of left when I jumped up to use 1,000 daggers on Patchouli here. And I also kind of was still learning this boss's patterns. This is a fairly difficult boss, but a really fun one. I mean, as you would expect, of course, for Patchouli Knowledge, who is insane, we'll call it, in a lot of different ways. But yeah, so I guess there's a lot to take in with this game. It's actually a pretty mechanically complex Metroidvania. That's a lot of fun, and whether or not you're a fan of the Touhou universe is probably not going to affect your enjoyment a huge amount. I think if you just like these kinds of games anyway, that you'll enjoy this. It is a bit short for its price, I will say. From what I've seen, I can't say this objectively, obviously, but from what I've seen, if you want to sort of go everywhere and do everything, it's probably going to run you about 6 hours-ish, 6.5 hours, probably somewhere around there. And that's not too bad. The game is $18 on Steam right now, and I believe it actually went through early access, although I didn't know that at the time. It's done now. It's not actually in early access, but this is the sort of complete form. I think it's a really good fan effort and a really interesting series that was actually done very well, and there's a lot of easy things to screw up here, so I'm very pleased with the result, you could say. So yeah, that is Touhou Luna Nights. If you want to know or see more, please do let me know in the description below this video. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you don't, and feel free to tell me why. And yeah, maybe go search out some Touhou games because they're freaking weird. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.